Welcome to the Cashflow Academy podcast. I'm your host, Andy Tanner, and this is where we make investing simple. Wonderful show on deck. I have Patrick Jenevein. I'll introduce him shortly. He is the author of Dancing with the Dragon, Cautionary Tales of the New China from an Old China Hand. And this is going to be a great one. Remember to like, subscribe, and hit your bell notification. And also drop by, very, very important, yourinvestingclass.com for goodies and education at no charge. So to set this show up a little bit, the world is a big place, but in a way it's shrinking. We've never had more interaction than I think we have today in information technology and the ability to communicate and the ability to ship things and logistics. And world powers come and go if you study history. And right now, it's a really interesting time where there's quite a bit of tension in my mind politically, but also even more economically in our relationship with China. And as an investor, I want to know where I can put my money and where potential opportunities are and also where potential risks are. So through that lens, we've asked Patrick Jenevein to be with us. He is the author of Dancing with the Dragon, Cautionary Tales of the New China from an Old China Hand. And Patrick, you have insight on China and personal experience that most of us don't have. So I think the listeners are going to be excited to hear your story. So welcome to the program. Thank you, Andy. Very kind of you to include me. So you're kind enough. You're traveling. This is not you're from in Kentucky right now, and I believe you're from the Carolinas. I want to say.
I went to college in North Carolina, but I'm from Texas.
Okay. Oh, from Dallas. That's right, from Dallas. Okay. And so awesome stuff. Tell us a little bit about what brought you to the point to want to write the book, what you do today, and kind of set the stage from a historical point of your experience. You were a big part of the energy industry. You wanted to expand that into China and work with them. Tell us a little bit about your background, if you would.
Okay. My first trip to China was 1995, and we went essentially to process natural gas. As soon as we had the opportunity to generate electricity in China, we jumped at that opportunity because we'd made more money generating electricity for Americans and in Texas than any other project we had been involved in. We were always trying to bring more reliable, cleaner energy sources to people anywhere. China represented a frontier, and Texans can't resist a frontier, whether it's physical or technological or any number of ways. So we went to China with great hopes of making a lot of money and doing great things for people. We wound up also starting a company to make blades for wind turbines. And we grew that company from nothing to the second biggest blade maker in the world. That was under the Deng Xiaoping China. So Deng was the leader that followed Mao. The new paramount leader in China, Xi Jinping, is reverting the Communist Party of China back to Mao-like days. And that poses all kinds of dangers for investors in China.
So, I thought you were complete with your thought. Please continue. Looks like you had one more thing to add.
Go ahead. I might talk too much.
No. We're here. They're not here to listen to me. They're here to listen to you for sure. They're tuning in to hear about China.
Okay, so we made a lot of money in China in the early days. And then when Xi Jinping rose to power, things changed. And the Communist Party stole money from our company. They took interest. They abrogated agreements, shifted equity interest to parties that they liked. They did not want the foreigner to make too much money. Now, they want to string foreigners along and promise the size of the Chinese market as a reason for you to hang around. But that's a trap.
It's interesting. I'll interject here. And there's a lot of people, you tread on dangerous ground when you boldly, write what you've written and say what you say, because we live in a world where immediately I can hear people already saying, well, he's a xenophobe. He's just xenophobic. That's just who he is. And we get a lot of that in the world. I would say this. I think you set, like, for example, with coronavirus, if there's a lab there and that's where the virus originated, that's either true or it's not true. It has nothing to do with what part of the world it would have been in. It's either true or it's not. And I don't know what it is, but I would be concerned with whether it was true or whether it was not true. And I think it's really important to frame this the right way, that so people just can't shoot arrows with you and say, well, because you're talking about doing business with someone other than some of the United States, oh, well, it's just xenophobic. I don't think that's either what you're saying is true or it's not true. It doesn't really have any bearing on who it's with. So I just want to frame that and kind of plant a flag there, if I may, to say, look, we're just simply talking about what is. Has nothing to do with whether it's in the United States or not, or whether it was Finland, or whether it was Great Britain, or whether it was China. This is about a business deal and your experience with a government, and that's just, I just want to plant that flag, if I may.
Well, let me follow up on that. Matt Pottinger, former Deputy National Security Advisor, wrote a blurb about the book, saying it comes through clearly that Jenevein loves China and loves the Chinese people. And then he goes on to talk about a post-communist future, which I think is really wonderful. But the more Chinese and Americans work together to create jobs, to generate wealth, the better our world will be. My problem right now is with Xi Jinping in particular. And you're right, Andy, that has put me in the crosshairs.
I'm sure.
An FBI agent called me one day and said, Patrick, if they were planning an operation against you, it'd be planned out of Houston. This was before the Chinese consulate in Houston closed, but they'd be planning the operation in Houston or out of the Houston consulate, and it would involve a Mexican drug cartel. So
wow.
the threats are real. That
Genuine.
One of their lawyers threatened my family one time, and they sued me personally for $300 million. So I can see why you might think I'm xenophobic about China and Chinese, but the accurate phobia is of the Communist Party led by Xi Jinping.
I think I love that clarity, because I know in the world we live in, I could already hear people in my mind's eye chirping before, because the problem with that is now if you shut that off immediately, say, well, you take Patrick and just cast him aside with a label, then you're going to miss what he had to say. You're going to miss his experience, and you're going to miss out on the truth. So tell me a little bit more about how, give us a little bit about what we're going to read in this book and what we're going to learn in this book about your experience. Give us some nuggets to look forward to.
Well, you'll read that we started in 1995 and that we jumped to making blades for wind turbines. We were going to take that company public in China for $1.8 billion. To make that IPO, or initial public offering, successful, we needed to expand our market. We were already selling in China. We monopoly. We didn't have well, we actually did. We were the biggest seller of blades in China, bar none, and we had already started to go international. Thailand, India, we went a bunch of places, Japan, and even the United States. But we wanted to grow our market. One way to do that was to start a company in Dallas. And we called that company Soaring Wind Energy, and it was developing wind farms, especially in the United States, but looking to go global. So we could go to a wind turbine manufacturer like GE and say, GE, we want to buy $100 million worth of your gear to put on our wind farm in Nebraska, but we want you to put our blades on your gear for our wind farm. And that was working really well. Then Xi Jinping started to rise or ascend within the Communist Party, and all of that changed. They eviscerated the value of our interest in the blade company in China, and we weren't going to go sue them in China because the Communist Party controls the judiciary in China. In fact, quick story, and it's in the
Yeah.
book. Um, one of our partner in the blade company was the biggest defense contractor in China. We call it AVIC, which is short for Aviation Industry Corporation of China. One of AVIC's subordinate units stole $8 million from our joint venture in China. It took us a while to figure out that's what happened. And when we do, say, oh, now we know what happened. AVIC, one of the biggest companies in China, put it back. And they said, okay, we will. And they didn't. We complained, and they sent us a bill for the taxes on the amount of money stolen. So,
Unbelievable.
so if you think you're going to get a fair trial in China, forget it. We did have a joint venture in the United States in soaring wind. And so we sued for breach of contract. They had hired our general manager, diverted financing. They stole a wind farm from us in West Texas, which is kind of embarrassing that you let somebody steal a wind farm. But they went around us, and they hired a lawyer that we'd been working with to switch the contracts into their name that allowed you to build the wind farm. Anyway, we sued, we won.
And when you, and just so the listeners are clear, when you sued, you're doing this in an American court, not in a foreign court.
That's correct. And our joint venture agreement required us to start with arbitration. We won. They didn't pay. We went to the U.S. District Court. We won. They didn't pay. They took us to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals twice. We won both of those. They didn't like that. They asked the Supreme Court to hear the case. They petitioned the Supreme Court to hear the case. And the Supreme Court said, look, the good guys, our side, have three votes on their favor, and you've got no justices on your side. So there's not even a dissenting opinion for the Supreme Court to consider. We also put one of AVIC's subordinate units in bankruptcy in California. So, and in the meantime, they sued me for $300 million personally. So it was a brawl, Andy.
I'll tell you what. So this is interesting.
We did collect dollars in Dallas in April 2022.
It is interesting that I think there's a couple of, there's always systemic lessons and individual lessons. In other words, there's lessons we can learn about the system. And for our listeners, I think it's really valuable to listen to experiences like yours because you learn personal lessons about business as well. And as I've done this podcast and had various guests, it almost always seems to be the case that there is a systemic lesson to learn, and in this case, it would be the broader relationship between not just U.S. and China, but the U.S. and the world. And there's also individual lessons to learn as an investor about how you invest, how you set up business, who you shake hands with. I'll share a little, I don't know if this is an anecdote or a story, but I'll share personal, and I'm not going to label the country. I've not been to China, so it's not China, but I've been to Taiwan. I've spoken and taught in Singapore and Malaysia and Japan and even South America and all throughout Europe, all kinds of countries in Europe. And what's interesting, I was in one particular event, and people were. It was like a sales seminar where you'd have all of these experts come, and they were selling their stuff, selling their programs. And they had asked me to come and sell my program, Cashflow Academy classes. And I was appalled at the lying and at the misrepresentation of the salespeople. They were just, totally unrealistic expectations, totally unrealistic, magic software. All you do is click a mouse and you got rich, and people turning, $1,000 into $1 million, just things that were not true. And I went to the promoter of the event, and I expressed my displeasure with this blatant dishonesty. And to make a longer story shorter, I learned something. That one of the things you got to know when you do business, and I'm not saying that this is China. China, it seems a little bit more deliberate in your case. But I realized that different cultures have different expectations for honesty and trust. And if you're going to do business internationally, you need to understand that. And I'll give you a poor metaphor. I'm a basketball player, at least I used to be. And actually, basketball is a game of deception. I'm going to use shot fakes to try to get you to believe that I'm doing something that I'm not. I'm going to set up my screen going one way, and then quickly I'm going to dart the other way to fake you out. And there are any number, I mean, about the only one in the NBA they've got on is flopping, is faking that I was run over. They do, but basketball is a game of deception. And the onus is really on me not to be deceived, and they have a total license on the other team to deceive me. And that's called gamesmanship. In a game of chess, it is not incumbent upon them to reveal their strategy. It's incumbent on me to figure that out. And I just like to have you touch, because that was a big moment for me, is I thought, you know what? I'm coming from a country that has huge regulations. SEC will be all over you. FTC would be all over you if you made a false claim. But in that particular meeting, the onus was on the culture was, it's like, these guys can say anything they want. It's your job as a consumer to be smarter and decide whether you think they're lying or not. There was no consumer protection. It was on the onus of the consumer. So I do think that there are people over there. I realized, is that a bad thing? Because these guys are probably wiser than me. They're probably smarter consumers and more discriminant because they're not protected. So I'd just like you to touch on that culture. Do you have any comments on that? That was a big moment for me in doing business internationally, kind of a growing up moment. Do you have comments on that?
I think that is a great metaphor here. And on the systemic versus personal, in a personal battle, you wind up butting your head against a wall, and then you start figuring out, hey, that wall is the system. And I'll get to deception in a moment. In our system, we start off with we the people. Our objective is to protect people from bullies, especially political bullies. Yes. The Communist Party wrote the Constitution for the People's Republic of China. And it enshrines the protection of the party from the very people that are the people in the People's Republic of China.
But it is supposed to serve. Yeah.
Well, you would think so, but the Constitution says no. We protect the Communist Party. So it's really difficult for Americans to think that oppositionally. That the Communist Party turns upside down our idea to protect people. And you're right about deception. If you're going into working in the People's Republic of China, you've got to assume that you're being deceived. And if you're going into China with your money, you need to protect it as if you're playing basketball, like you said, that they have a license to deceive, and they even enshrine it. In Chinese culture today, or the culture in China that the Communist Party has fostered, one of the expectations of good behavior from people that the Communist Party of China controls is to steal from foreigners. They steal $200 to $600 billion of intellectual property from Americans every year, according to our Department of Justice.
And not to overuse the metaphor and exhaust it, but John Stockton is my favorite NBA player because he has a really interesting thing. He has the record for assists, meaning he helps his own teammates, but he also holds the record in steals, which means he hurts the other team. I help my team more than any other player that has ever played, and I've stolen more from another team. And we exalt those steals. We cheer that stealing. We don't abhor that stealing. We cheer for it as a good thing, as gamesmanship. And that's a really important perspective to take, because if you come with the value system of our country, which is generally, maybe I would say a majority of the people in our country would look at the 10 Commandments and say, thou shalt not steal. but John Stockton's allowed to steal all he wants, and it's a good thing, not a bad thing. And so if you don't have a thou shalt not steal moral compass where you shift it into, no, this is gamesmanship, this is actually a good thing, it really changes the way I think you would think about doing business.
You're still referring to rules, and we are as capitalists. I would argue that as capitalists, we look to rules to protect our activities, our positions, whether it's investing money or playing basketball. We expect referees, whether it's the referee on a basketball court or the judges in a
courtroom,
to enforce the rules. And the opposite of that is what I really call imperialism, where a ruler uses power to affect outcomes. And so, just kind of really broadly but quickly, in imperialism allocates capital or resources globally by occupation, by conquest. Capitalists allocate capital through a system of laws. And our laws say, if you've got more money for that cup of coffee, you can buy it before I can. Or if you've got more money to buy that gold or that coal or that oil and gas or that lithium or cobalt, whatever, you get it. Under an imperialistic system, like the communists run, conquest, like conquest of Africa, or contractual conquest of even Eastern Russia now. More and more the Communist Party is conquesting by contract for agricultural resources, for mineral resources. But it's the conquest of an imperialist that we fundamentally oppose. Instead, we say we're going to allocate resources through a system of laws.
We're going to take a short break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of each culture, each country, when it comes to doing business. We'll be right back.
I am learning a lot, and it's easy to understand. Andy is fun. Andy's very enthusiastic to watch. He makes it a lot simpler to understand. I'm really benefiting from everything that he's teaching. I think the most valuable thing I've learned from Andy so far is the fact that it's not scary and it's easy to do.
Anybody can do this with the right amount of education, effort, and willingness to learn. You can learn it too. Andy, thanks for making this simple. Thanks for making this fun. Thanks for pouring your heart into this. Thank you very much.
Welcome back to the Cashflow Academy podcast. I'm your host, Andy Tanner. This is where we do our best to make investing more simple. This is an important topic. We've been speaking with Patrick Jenevein, who is the author of Dancing with the Dragon, Cautionary Tales of the New China from an Old China Hand. Patrick, let's talk now a little bit more systemically in the idea of competition. China is a huge exporter. We buy a lot of things that are made in China. And there's a race. I think the biggest, you'd know more than me, but I would think one of the biggest challenges we have is there's sort of a Sputnik moment when you have this AI that's budgeting. And Sputnik, created a space race between the U.S. and the Soviets. Who's going to get to the moon first and plant a flag? Well, that was one thing. But I would say the space race in terms of getting to high levels of artificial intelligence. I mean, there's a certain level that we haven't gotten yet where it's really beyond human. We're not there yet. But the person who gets the upper hand in AI, boy, there's this feeling that they rule the world. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but there's a really great question that my producers prompted me to ask. What are China's competitive advantages, either economically or in terms of the sheer number of people they have? My son he plays for a what we call a 6A school, which is a largest high school. And they're just going to be better than a 1A school simply because a 6A school has thousands of students to pick. You're going to have more 6, 7 guys than you have in, say, a 1A school where there's 50 people in the graduating class. And with the sheer number of people, can you just get better minds because you have more people? I mean, what are some of the competitive advantages China has in your view?
Really good observations, Andy. And let me start with AI. AI ought to scare the hell out of us. AI can make weapons more massively destructive, more quickly, and more
Yeah.
accurately. I mean, it ought to terrify us all. If you sign up for a capitalistic belief where you're going to have laws to protect people, you actually protect the self-expression and the innovation of people. So you've got a number of people versus how free people are to fulfill their potentials. So the Communist Party controls a population that's huge. So you're absolutely right. They've got an advantage of being a 6A school versus a 1A school. But it's also, we can also look to Russia and Ukraine. Russia has a whole lot more people, but the Ukrainians protect people, which allows them to innovate quicker than the people that they don't allow.
Great
So
point.
Russia
Great point.
Russia gets more people killed every day than the Ukrainians. But in a China-U.S. context, we empower more of our people when we're at our best. And there are, a lot of times we're not at our best, but when we are at our best, we allow our people to express their ideas, to test their ideas, to do more that innovates, that creates. And we have a idea generation, a wealth creation benefit or advantage that China will never match. Now, how does that work when you've got 1.4 billion people versus 340 million? The game ain't over.
It's interesting. We'll create these ideas and then they'll steal it.
It's another advantage that they have is that they don't play by rules, and so they steal. The DOJ, our DOJ says they steal $200 to $600 billion every year. Pretty quickly, that becomes over $1 trillion, either over with it in 2 years or 5 years. But that's a heck of a lot of money. And it's the ideas. China has an innovation-driven development strategy, and you would think, hey, that's a great idea. We want to drive innovation. But if you read it carefully, it includes stealing innovation from anywhere in the world that it's created.
It's interesting. Would you invest in now? There's lots of different ways to invest in other countries. You can do it as you did with a deal, right? You're going to go make a deal with another company in that country. But there are, exchange traded funds. There's other ways to get exposure to international markets. For example, one of the things that was interesting in the Ukraine is, there was past tense, there was an ETF that was much like the S&P is U.S. companies. There's an ETF that's a basket of Russian companies, and as the war in Ukraine began to heat up, and they put their tanks there, and kind of, there's gamesmanship or lying there. It says, well, we're just doing exercises. We're not going to invade, right? We're just lining all our tanks up to do exercises, right? You could see this coming, and I sold a ton of puts. That I was willing to buy things at like $1 if it went to $1 over there, right? And of course, me and Corey Halliday, one of my teachers, did it, and I thought, let's just see what happens. And sure enough, as soon as the war broke out, they froze trading on those things, and so the person on the other side of that trade was in a rough spot because they either had to exercise that and call me out and force me to buy something that they think might not be worth a penny anymore. So, those puts expired, the money stayed in our pocket, and, it was kind of an interesting trade because I hadn't traded a lot internationally. I brought, there's Petro Brazil that has been an interesting oil company that I've dabbled with. But would you invest in China that way? Would you? I mean, there's a lot of potential there. And if you can't beat people, own them. People are saying, I'm scared that AI is going to take my job. Okay, well then buy an AI company, so own the entity that takes your job. How do you feel about You see where I'm going with this. How do you feel about investing in China for our listeners and a guy like me?
Well, go for it, but understand what you're betting on. You're not betting on the company performance. You're betting on the Communist Party's decision to either support companies or not. So it may look like you're making an equity or investing in equity or debenture or some kind of derivative, but understand that you're not investing in the company or the market. You're investing in the behavior of a political entity, and that political entity is the Communist Party of China. So if you think you can project the Communist Party of China's behavior, go for it, but be awfully careful. And if you are,
great comment.
If you are,
no, I have to interrupt there.
Understand that the Communist Party has one goal, and that's to perpetuate its power. And if you can figure out how the party thinks it's going to perpetuate its party, go make $1 gazillion. But
that's so. I have to interrupt there because that's so well said. If I go back to that trade that I talked about, I wasn't betting on when I sold those puts on the Russian ETF. I wasn't betting on on a dip on Russian commerce that I would pick up at a bargain and get paid to do it, and then all of a sudden it would rise again. That was 100% political. I was betting on a war. I absolutely bet on a war, and very rarely do I do that. That's why I'm kind of smirking when I tell that story, and I have to confess it wasn't a large position. It was more of a video game for me and my buddy to say, let's just see if we can pull this off. It wasn't like I made $1 million on that deal. I'm not even close, right? It was just kind of some fun gamesmanship, and I thought you said it well, that's one instance where, I usually, as Warren Buffett invests in companies, and I did play a political game in that instance. There's no question about it. What would you advise in terms of I'm apolitical. I'm just so tired of the rhetoric of all those sides. It's so easy to get sucked into loyalty to a party as opposed to a loyalty to truth. I'm of the opinion that you could take any entity, and you could poke holes in some of the things they've done. People make mistakes. No one's perfect. So without getting too political, either party, doesn't matter, Democrat, Republican, whatever, what would you advise in terms of the relationship between the United States and China? What would you have to say politically?
I don't avoid political issues or comments. I try to address those in a supra-partisan manner. And quick story on that. Several times when I was in China, somebody would ask me at a dinner, or would tell me at a dinner, "Your president," and as soon as they said "your president," I felt the crawling on the back of my neck. They said, "Your president is, stupid or wrong." And I got to where I just listened, and I said, "Well, you may be right, and you can criticize my president, and so can I." And then I stopped. And the best part of my answer was stopping, because they could not criticize the general secretary. Yeah.
Boy, what a beautiful idea there. That's nice.
But politically, I would say we've got to understand our counterparty, and our counterparty is the Communist Party, and they will push and push and push. And if you never push back, you get pushed over. If you're setting that screen and you're moving, you're either committing a foul or you're not having an effective screen.
But you'll push it to the edge.
Yeah, and politically, we've had so many of our leaders talk like Churchill and act like Chamberlain. They'll say the rhetoric can go bad. Nancy Pelosi can go to Taiwan, and that's great rhetoric. But then where's the actual that's the Chamberlain showing up and saying something. Where is the actual Churchill pushback? We need to be confident in ourselves. Our system is better than theirs. We're not perfect. We still need to treat all people better, but we try to treat all people better. The Communist Party treats all people worse. They treat all people as if they're fodder for Communist Party objectives.
Well said. Last thing we'll touch on, which I think is a really interesting question about division. Well, it's so unfortunate in our country, the United States, that people it's almost as if they're forced into choosing a side. You got to pick one or the other, and there's going to be, it was Teller from the duo Penn and Teller who said something to the effect that when you give people a choice, they have the illusion that they have agency, right? And they get that from the card trick, like pick a card, any card, and it gives the illusion that you have freedom to pick any card, but they're really forcing one on you. It's just that game. Is that going to happen in the world? I mean, are you going to have to say, I'm either with the U.S. or I'm with China? Certainly China and Russia have aligned more than they have, and I think China's the huge winner in that. Huge winner. If Russia has to align with China in order to have enough strength to push its agenda, boy, talk about doing a deal with the devil. You remember World War II, you're fighting Germany, you're fighting Japan. Boy, do you want to be a part of that, Russia? You really want to do a deal with China? Because once it's all settled, China is going to put themselves before you. Do you see that there's going to be a world coming where you're either with the United States or you're with China? Is that division going to happen?
I think so, Andy. I think it's happening right now, or I think it's already happened. And I think it's China that's pushing that, and more specifically, more accurately, it's Xi Jinping himself that's pushing the choice. Deng Xiaoping said to Chinese, you know what? We need to actually protect self-expression of Chinese. He didn't say it that way, but in effect, he said, look, we need to protect the self-expression of Chinese. And so what he did, it used to be that the Communist Party took all the grain that a commune would grow, and then they would distribute it. Deng Xiaoping said, look, if you get to some level of grain production, you can keep anything above that, but we want the first, whatever. That empowered farmers on communes to produce a whole lot more, and grain production soared after that. Xi Jinping has come back around and said, no, you give us everything. We're not going to protect people. We're going to protect the Communist Party. And we are in a point where we've got to decide, do we protect people or do we protect bullies? And it's Xi Jinping that has pushed that choice on us.
Well, and I also think you made a great point at the top of the show, is that they're a government of leadership and we're a government of people. And if our people are weaker than their leaders, then they have the upper hand. We need to be stronger than them. And one of the things that concerns me is that, a lot of the regimes that I find how should I say it, less palatable, to put it extremely lightly, they can have multi-generation agendas that probably don't change. Putin's been in power for how long? And that really allows them to keep consistent work on their goals, good or bad, that consistency. Whereas in our system, we have a pendulum that swings from one extreme to another, one extreme to another, one extreme to another, and we have much more infighting. In my opinion, that makes us weaker. We want a form of, socialism, communism are not the same thing, but as we push more towards a socialistic ideal, that really makes it interesting to me in terms of the strength of our people. In other words, the more we depend on our own government and become dependents, you lose your power. It's a lot like a kid who has to depend on his parents for too long, that he doesn't gain the true 4th of July independence. Our Constitution, I think, is really set up for people to become self-empowered and not have to lean on government as much and make government smaller. But as our government grows bigger and as we bicker amongst ourselves, I don't know, maybe it's a healthy strengthening process where we bicker, or maybe, divided we fall. I don't know. Be interesting stuff.
It can be, Andy. It can be strengthening or debilitating. The self-criticism that we push upon ourselves can be very
strengthening. Yeah.
The real difference to me is how much authority do we push to people? Do we push to families? Do we push to frontiers, to companies, to institutions? And how much do we pull back to the federal government? Right now, Xi Jinping in China is pulling every decision, every authority back to the central government. And that in the long run will weaken China. The more we do the same, the more we weaken ourselves. The more we push authority and responsibility for decisions to individuals, the more powerful those individuals come and the stronger our country becomes.
I'll finish with one more tied reference to our basketball analogy. When I first, I didn't get to play in high school, wasn't part of my life, but in college I had the chance to play. And I remember my first coach, I went and I had to try out. I didn't get a scholarship offer the first time. I had to earn that scholarship later because I had no history. And he watched me play, and he pulled me in his office trying to decide whether to give me a shot or not. And he said, you can shoot, and you're quick, and you're athletic, and you can dunk it, but you have no court savvy. In other words, you don't understand the game. You don't understand all this deception that goes on. You're not court savvy to it. And I had to do that by watching film. I had to watch film and have someone teach me how this game worked. Well, in business, this is why I think someone buys your book, because it's a lot like watching that film for me. I think the reason you buy this is there's a certain savvy, I'm not talking about changing your morals. I'm talking about being shrewd and savvy in a way that you're not naive. I'm talking about a lack of naivete, not a sinister agenda. I'm talking about able to be an investor, be a business person. One of the best lessons you can ever have is legal stuff. You go through the legal system and you'll learn more about business and people. I'll tell you, I haven't spent a lot of time in legal battles, but I've had friends that are, and I've had a few. And I will tell you, those legal issues were some of the best lessons that I'd ever learned about how systems work, about how lawyers work, about how people work, rhetorical context versus veridical context. I will tell you. So when I sat down and decided I was going to be a ball player, I says, Andy, you could take all the time to learn these lessons slow, or you can speed that process up, because I can only have a game a week, but I can watch 20 films in a week. And that's why I think someone goes to Amazon.com and orders Dancing with the Dragon. Because if you watch, Patrick dance with the dragon, I guarantee you your naivete will begin to dissolve to some degree. One of my biggest fears, even as a middle-aged guy and having done business for 30 years, I look at the next 20 that I want to do business, and my number one is naivete. I don't want to be in deals that I don't understand. And I just think that's the opportunity of your book, is to help people become more savvy in terms of reducing naivete, and you'll still keep your goodness. At least that's my thought. Is that fair?
That's very kind, Andy. I spent a decade of my most productive years in fighting the Communist Party. And I don't want anybody else to have to do that. Get rid of that naivete early, quickly, as fast as you can. And then we can make better decisions, and we can make our country stronger. We can protect our investments, and all kinds of good things come if you learn lessons well. And there I spent a decade of my most productive years fighting the Communist Party. Learn from it if you can.
Getting smarter. Patrick, just thank you for the time. I feel so fortunate every week when I get to interview someone that's had a different and broader experience than I have. I think it's helped me over the years, so many guests, and you've certainly been a wonderful source of information to our listeners. And I hope it's food for thought in big picture things, personal things, as well as systemic things. Please hang on so I can properly thank you after I close the show. You've been listening to the Cashflow Academy podcast. I'm your host, Andy Tanner. We've been speaking with Patrick Jenevein, who is the author of Dancing with the Dragon, Cautionary Tales of the New China from an Old China Hand. And also drop by yourinvestingclass.com for goodies from me. Also, another way to reduce naivete is to get more educated on how things work. And so if you want to be an investor, that's what we're here to do, is help you. And at yourinvestingclass.com, free information there. Hope you enjoyed our conversation, and we'll see you next time.